Professor Mroon adjusted his six-fingered hands on the hovering podium and surveyed the amphitheater with 4 of his 6 eyes. The remaining 2 focused on his lecture notes. His blue-gray skin wrinkled around his breathing slits as he suppressed what humans might recognize as a sigh of frustration. As we begin our discussion on advanced interstellar battle tactics, I must remind everyone that this is a serious class for serious scholars. His voice boomed through the chamber, thanks to the natural resonance chamber in his throat. The Galactic Academy of Military Strategy does not award positions based on charity cases. Everyone knew exactly who that barb was directed at. In the 3rd row, seated between a 7-foot-tall Valerian with bioluminescent skin and a gelatinous Nolarian who needed a special containment chair, sat the only human in the entire academy, Eliza Blackwood, the Deathworlder. The girl from the planet the Galactic community had classified as fundamentally unsurvivable, yet somehow produced a species arrogant enough to think they belonged among the stars. A species whose homeworld featured such charming attributes as atmospheric oxygen above 20%, practically explosive, crushing gravity, extreme temperature variations, constant natural disasters, and an evolutionary history of apex predators hunting each other. Now class, pull up the simulation models for the Arcturian Proxima conflict of the 843rd Standard Cycle, Professor Mroon instructed, his secondary voice box adding undertones of authority that made most species instinctively comply. Eliza tapped her datapad like everyone else, but didn't miss the way the Valerian next to her shifted his chair slightly away. Deathworlders were unpredictable, after all. Might snap at any moment. Honored Professor called out Zivpax, a multi-limbed centaurian whose family had donated 3 wings to the Academy. Must we really study alongside it? These lessons contain sensitive tactical information. What if the humans decide to use them against the Galactic Alliance? Professor Mroon's mouth slits curved in what passed for a smile. An understandable concern, student Zivpax. However, the diplomatic corps has assured us that humans are, how did they phrase it, mostly harmless. Their inclusion here is purely symbolic, I assure you. Laughter rippled through the class. Several students performed their species equivalent of eye-rolling. Eliza kept her face neutral, but her knuckles whitened around her stylus. She'd fought too hard for this position to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Her acceptance had required 3 times the standard qualifying scores, 6 diplomatic treaties, and the personal intervention of Admiral Jackson back on Earth. Besides, the professor continued, secondary voice box humming with amusement, understanding truly advanced tactical theory requires a certain evolutionary sophistication that Deathworlders simply cannot grasp. More laughter. Someone in the back row made the universal hand gesture for primitive brain. Eliza just sat quietly and pulled up the battle map that had cost the lives of 83,000 Arcturian soldiers. Already, she could see at least 6 critical flaws in the deployment strategy. The Arcturian Proxima conflict. Professor Mroon began with the dramatic flair of someone who believed his every word should be recorded for posterity. It represents the single most definitive case study in superior tactical positioning in the last 3 millennia. The holographic battle map expanded in the center of the amphitheater, showing 2 distinct fleet formations in different colors. Red for Arcturians, blue for the Proxima Collective. Now, observe the elegant deployment of the Arcturian forces. Professor Mroon practically cooed, his secondary voice box vibrating with admiration. Notice the perfect hexagonal formation, the mathematically precise spacing, the layered defense grid. He gestured dramatically with 3 of his arms. This, students, is what perfection looks like. Eliza squinted at the display. The Arcturian ships were indeed arranged in a visually striking pattern. Too striking, too perfect, too predictable. Yet somehow the professor's tone shifted to one of manufactured mystery. The Arcturians suffered a devastating defeat, a puzzle that has confounded our greatest military minds for decades. The Valerian next to Eliza Zorvan was his name leaned toward a 4-armed Tresian named Mila and whispered just loud enough for Eliza to hear, "I bet the human thinks they could have won with primitive projectile weapons and screaming." Mila's translucent skin rippled with suppressed laughter. or by throwing their waste products. I heard that's how they won their first lunar conflict. Please, Tavik, a serpentine Draxian with metallic scales, joined in from the row behind. Everyone knows humans only manage space travel because they stole the technology from their own science fiction entertainment. Professor Mroon continued his lecture, zooming into specific sections of the battle map. The Arcturian Grand Admiral Zelkor was considered the greatest tactical mind of his generation. His positioning theory has been the foundation of our military doctrine for centuries. Eliza's eyes darted across the hologram, noticing how the Proxima forces were arranged in what appeared to be a chaotic, asymmetrical blob. Yet they had won. Decisively. As you can see, the professor highlighted various ship clusters with a wave of his hand. The Arcturians maintained perfect formation throughout the first 3 phases of battle. Their discipline was impeccable. What the professor wasn't highlighting was how the Proxima ships were constantly shifting, adapting, never presenting the same formation twice. It reminded Eliza of something from Earth history. The key factors in this conflict were, of course, the superior Arcturian technology and their unparalleled strategic discipline. Professor Mroon sounded like he was reciting from a textbook he'd written himself. The Proxima victory was largely attributed to their unexpected resource advantage and numerical superiority. That wasn't it at all. Eliza's fingers twitched as she spotted more discrepancies between the professor's explanation and what the actual battle data showed. The Arcturians had more ships, better weapons. But they were fighting as if playing chess, while the Proxima were fighting like. Now let's examine Phase 4 of the battle, where many inexperienced analysts claim the Arcturians made tactical errors. The professor's mouth slits curled with disdain. Such a simplistic interpretation betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of advanced combat theory. Eliza bit her lip so hard she almost drew blood. The errors were screaming at her from the hologram. The rigid formation, the predictable response patterns, the fatal assumption that the enemy would follow the same rulebook. She'd seen the exact same mistakes in Earth's military history during the Battle of the IA Drang Valley, Operation Market Garden, the Soviet Winter War against Finland. It was the classic blunder of a technologically superior force underestimating an adaptive opponent. Tavik flicked a small piece of something at the back of Eliza's head. Look, the Deathworlder is confused by the big lights. Maybe we should use smaller words? Zorvan and Mila snickered. Eliza ignored them, her mind racing as she mentally reconfigured the entire battle scenario. 6 major flaws. No, 7. The Arcturians had never stood a chance, but not for any of the reasons Mroon was droning on about. All around her, the other students were dutifully taking notes, accepting every word Professor Mroon said as gospel. Not one of them was questioning the definitive analysis. Eliza's hand hovered over her console. One push of a button, and she could project her own analysis onto the main display. But she hesitated, remembering Admiral Jackson's warning before she left Earth, "Don't make waves. Humanity's position is too precarious." So she sat quietly, watching as Professor Mroon butchered military history with the confidence only true ignorance could provide. Professor Mroon paused dramatically, all 6 eyes scanning the amphitheater. Now for the truly challenging intellectual exercise. Can anyone identify the precise reason the Arcturians lost this supposedly unlosable battle? Hands shot up across the room, mostly appendages belonging to students from influential families or prestigious worlds. Yes, student Zivpax. The multi-limbed Centaurian rose, posture radiating confidence. The Arcturians failed to account for the quantum fluctuations in the nearby nebula, which caused a 0.03% degradation in their sensor array efficiency. This minor oversight cascaded through their battle network, creating microsecond delays in their targeting systems. Professor Mroon's breathing slits widened in approval. An excellent observation, subtle and sophisticated. Next came Tavik, the serpentine Draxian. If I may add, honored professor, the Arcturians also suffered from psychopolitical constraints. Their hierarchical command structure required approval from 3 tiers of leadership before tactical adjustments could be implemented, resulting in response lags of up to 47 seconds. Brilliantly observed. Professor Mroon practically gushed. This is the level of analysis that separates true military geniuses from common soldiers. Mila raised 2 of her 4 hands. The Arcturians also adhered too rigidly to the 7th principle of galactic combat theory, which states that symmetrical formations maximize energy distribution. However, they failed to consider that the Proxima Collective had developed quantum entanglement communication, rendering the energy distribution advantage moot. The professor actually applauded with multiple hands. Exceptional. This is why the Galactic Academy accepts only the finest minds. More students offered increasingly elaborate theories, each more convoluted than the last. Professor Mroon reveled in the display of academic jargon and theoretical complexity. Throughout it all, Eliza sat quietly, her hand firmly down, until Professor Mroon's gaze deliberately fell on her. "Ah, but we haven't heard from our exotic specimen." Student Blackwood, surely Earth's primitive military history has something to contribute? Perhaps some insight about throwing rocks very hard? His secondary voice box rumbled with barely disguised mockery. The amphitheater filled with snickers and the various species equivalents of eye-rolling. Eliza looked down at her datapad, then up at the battle simulation still rotating majestically in the center of the room. "No insights to share?" Professor Mroon pressed. Unsurprising, given that humans barely understand 3-dimensional space travel, let alone the complexities of tactical. "The Arcturians lost because they were fighting the last war," Eliza said quietly. The professor's speech faltered. "I beg your pardon?" Eliza took a deep breath and stood up. "May I approach the simulation, Professor?" A moment of stunned silence hung in the air. Students didn't touch the professor's precious battle simulations. "By all means," Professor Mroon finally said, gesturing grandly. "Show us what Earth's military expertise has to offer." Eliza walked down to the central platform where the holographic battle map hovered. She looked at it for exactly 6 seconds. Then her fingers flew across the control panel. The entire simulation transformed. Ship positions shifted, battle lines reconfigured. Tactical overlays appeared showing energy signatures, weapons ranges, and movement vectors that hadn't been displayed before. The elegant hexagonal formation of the Arcturians now appeared painfully vulnerable, with glaring blind spots and predictable response patterns. The seemingly chaotic positioning of the Proxima forces revealed itself as a brilliantly adaptive hunting formation. It took her exactly 6 seconds to completely recontextualize the entire battle. Eliza stepped back from the controls. The amphitheater was dead silent. Even the gelatinous Nolarian had stopped its usual ambient bubbling. What have you done to my simulation?" Professor Mroon demanded, all 6 eyes wide with shock. "I didn't change your data," Eliza said calmly. "I just displayed what was already there." She pointed to the Arcturian formation. "This isn't perfect. It's textbook." "There's a difference." She moved her finger to the Proxima forces. "And this isn't chaos. It's adaptation." The professor's mouth slits opened and closed several times without producing sound. The secondary voice box emitted a high-pitched whine of distress. "The Arcturians lost," Eliza continued into the silence, "because they prepared to fight an enemy that would follow the same rules they did. They built a perfect formation based on theoretical models rather than battlefield reality. Meanwhile, the Proxima forces were using—" She hesitated, searching for a term these aliens might understand, emergent tactical evolution. She pointed to specific ship clusters. "See these response patterns? The Proxima ships are acting like a swarm, but not a mindless one. They're displaying both individual initiative and collective intelligence. They're learning and adapting in real time." Zorvan found his voice first. That's not possible. Combat doctrine requires centralized command and—" "Says who?" Eliza challenged. "Your textbooks?" because the battle results say something different. Professor Mroon finally recovered enough to sputter, "This is preposterous." The Arcturians had superior technology, superior numbers, superior training. And they still lost, Eliza said simply. Because they fought like they were playing a mathematical game, while the Proxima fought like they were trying to survive. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Professor Mroon cleared his throat slits. "And what, pray tell, makes a first cycle student from a quarantined Deathworld an expert on interstellar combat?" Eliza gestured to the battle map. "I'm not claiming to be an expert on interstellar combat, but I do recognize these patterns. We've seen them throughout Earth's military history." She pointed to a specific section of the Arcturian formation. "This right here? We call it fighting the last war." The Arcturians positioned their forces to counter tactics that worked in previous conflicts. But warfare doesn't stand still. "That's absurd," Professor Mroon scoffed. "Tactical doctrine evolves through careful academic study and mathematical optimization, not whatever you're suggesting." "On Earth, we have a saying," Eliza replied. "No battle plan survives contact with the enemy." She highlighted several key moments in the simulation. The Arcturians made 7 critical errors. First, they prioritized formation integrity over tactical flexibility. Second, they assumed the enemy would follow conventional engagement protocols. Third, they failed to adapt when those assumptions proved wrong. Her fingers danced across the controls, advancing the simulation to show the catastrophic collapse of the Arcturian lines. Fourth, they treated their technological advantage as an automatic victory condition. Fifth, they maintained centralized command when the situation called for distributed decision-making. Sixth, they ignored clear evidence that their strategy wasn't working until it was too late to change course. And seventh, she paused, looking directly at the professor, they underestimated their opponent. Tavik hissed from his seat. "This is ridiculous. The human is making it sound like some primitive instinct is superior to generations of advanced tactical theory." Eliza shook her head. "Not primitive. Different. Humans evolved on a planet where patterns matter, where noticing the subtle shift in grass movement could mean a predator was stalking you, where reading weather patterns determined if your crops lived or died, where understanding terrain could decide a battle before it began." She pulled up a comparison view, showing the initial and final positions of the fleets. The Proxima ships moved like predators hunting prey. Their formation continuously adapted to exploit weaknesses. They used decentralized command, allowing individual ship captains to make tactical decisions based on local conditions. "But that defies all established doctrine," Mila protested. "How can there be strategic coherence without unified command?" "Emergent order," Eliza answered. "Humans have been studying this for centuries. Flocks of birds don't have a leader telling each one where to fly, but they maintain perfect formation. Ant colonies don't have a central planner, but they build complex structures. Complex systems can self-organize." Professor Mroon studied the reconfigured battle map with growing intensity. His 6 eyes blinked in different patterns as he processed what he was seeing. "You're suggesting," he said slowly, "that the Proxima Collective was using some form of swarm intelligence tactical doctrine." "Exactly," Eliza said, "and the Arcturians never adapted to counter it. They kept trying to find the command ships, the strategic headquarters, the central node they could target to make it all fall apart. But there wasn't one." She zoomed in on a particular section. "See here? 3 Proxima ships sacrificed themselves to create an opening. No commander ordered that they recognized an opportunity and took independent action toward a shared goal." "Fascinating," Professor Mroon murmured, almost despite himself. "But surely such a doctrine sacrifices efficiency? The computational resources required for each vessel to make independent assessments would be enormous." Eliza smiled. "That's where humans differ from most galactic species, Professor. We don't see chaos as something to be controlled through perfect mathematical models. We see patterns in the chaos. It's how we survived on a planet that was constantly trying to kill us." She stepped back from the console. The Arcturians lost because they fought according to theory. The Proxima won because they fought according to reality. Professor Mroon's secondary voice box emitted a low hum as he circled the hologram, examining it from multiple angles. His skepticism was visibly battling with intellectual curiosity. This perspective has merit, he finally admitted, each word seeming physically painful to speak. Though it contradicts 3 centuries of established tactical doctrine, all of which was written after the fact to explain away the uncomfortable truth, Eliza said, that a supposedly inferior force using adaptive, distributed tactics completely destroyed a textbook perfect formation. The professor's eyes narrowed. And you recognized all this in 6 seconds? Eliza shrugged. Pattern recognition. It's what keeps Deathworlders alive. A deafening alarm suddenly blared throughout the amphitheater, followed by flashing red emergency lights. Attention all personnel. Hostile vessels detected. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The holographic battle simulation flickered and was replaced by a real-time tactical display showing the Academy station and 5 approaching ships. Dren Raiders, someone shouted. Panic erupted instantly. Students scrambled from their seats, some heading for emergency shelters, others frozen in place. A few of the gelatinous species began secreting stress hormones that filled the air with a sickly sweet smell. Everyone remain calm, Professor Mroon shouted, but his secondary voice box was emitting distress tones that contradicted his words. The Academy's automated defense systems will. The tactical display flickered. Half the defense grid indicators turned from green to red. Red alert, command center systems compromised. Defense grid partially offline. Communications systems offline. Professor Mroon's skin turned a sickly pale blue. This is unprecedented. The Raiders must have planted a virus in our systems. We're doomed. Tavik wailed, his metallic scales rattling in fear. The Dren take no prisoners. Amidst the chaos, Eliza moved calmly to the tactical console. Her fingers flew across the controls, bringing up subsystem diagnostics and station schematics. Professor, she called out, does this classroom system have direct access to the remaining defense grid? Professor Mroon blinked rapidly. Why, yes, but only for simulation purposes. It's not designed for actual combat operations. It'll have to do, Eliza muttered. She pulled up a station-wide communication channel. Attention all security personnel. Command center is compromised. Fall back to secondary defense positions and await tactical instructions from Amphitheater 7. What are you doing? Professor Mroon demanded, rushing to her side. You can't just take control of. With all due respect, Professor, we don't have time for a committee meeting, Eliza said, never taking her eyes off the display. The Raiders will board in approximately 3 minutes. She expanded the tactical display, highlighting specific sections of the Academy station. Zorvan, Mila, Tavik, make yourselves useful. I need you to relay commands to the security teams in these sectors. To everyone's surprise, including their own, they complied immediately. Professor, I need access to the emergency protocols, Eliza said. The Raiders are using a standard hunting formation just like the Proxima did. They're expecting us to follow conventional defense doctrine. The professor hesitated only briefly before entering his authorization codes. Eliza immediately reconfigured the remaining defense turrets, moving them from their standard coverage pattern to seemingly random positions. She diverted power from non-essential systems to strengthen shields in unexpected areas. What is this madness? Professor Mroon asked, watching as she systematically violated every defensive principle in the Academy textbooks. This, Eliza said with grim determination, is Deathworld thinking. They're expecting you to defend according to Galactic standard doctrine. So we're going to do the exact opposite. On the tactical display, the Raiders approached, confident in their attack pattern until the Academy's remaining defenses opened fire from impossible angles, catching 3 ships in a devastating crossfire. How did you, the professor, began? I saw the pattern, Eliza said, already reconfiguring for the next phase. Raiders always hide their priority targets in the middle of their formation. These aren't mindless pirates, they're hunting for something specific. She highlighted a particular raider vessel. That one. They're protecting it, which means it's carrying their technical specialists. A slight, predatory smile crossed her face. So that's the one we hit first. Throughout the amphitheater, students watched in awe as the human Deathworlder calmly coordinated a defense that defied all conventional tactics and was working. Security Team Epsilon, ignore the standard containment protocols, Eliza ordered through the comm. I need you to deliberately fall back from Junction 14. Make it look like you're retreating in disarray. But that will leave the auxiliary data center exposed. Professor Mroon protested. Exactly, Eliza nodded. They'll think they've found a weakness. When they commit to that path, she typed a series of commands, establishing a kill box that would catch the raiders the moment they took the bait. The tactical display showed the boarding parties moving exactly where she predicted they would. Now, she said quietly. The emergency lights stopped flashing. The alarm fell silent. On the tactical display, the remaining raider ships were rapidly retreating, their boarding parties either captured or scrambling back to their vessels. Alert, hostile forces retreating. Command center systems rebooting. Communications restored. The amphitheater doors slid open as Admiral Krexvora, the Academy commandant, rushed in with a security detail. The massive Thracian stopped abruptly, all four arms holding weapons that slowly lowered as he surveyed the scene. What in the name of the seven spiral galaxies happened here? The Admiral demanded. We were completely blind in the command center, and somehow the raiders were repelled. All eyes turned to Eliza, who was calmly shutting down the tactical systems. Student Blackwood implemented an unconventional defense strategy, Admiral, Professor Mroon explained, his voice a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. She anticipated the raiders' movements with uncanny accuracy. The Admiral's cranial ridges furrowed. A student? A human student? Apparently, Professor Mroon said, with a new humility in his secondary voice tones, Deathworld adaptations have certain practical applications in crisis situations. Around the amphitheater, the alien students were looking at Eliza with expressions ranging from shock to newfound respect. Tavik, Mila, and Zorvan stood awkwardly by the console where they had been relaying her commands. It was just pattern recognition, sir, Eliza said, addressing the Admiral. Raiders use predictable hunting formations. They expect targets to follow standard defense protocols. So we didn't. Admiral Krexvora approached the tactical display, examining the record of the engagement. You deliberately exposed critical systems as bait, created false retreat patterns, reconfigured our defensive grid into what is this formation. It violates every principle of the Galactic defense doctrine. Yes, sir. Eliza nodded. That's why it worked. Remarkable, the Admiral muttered. Simply remarkable. In 40 cycles at this academy, I've never seen anything like it. Professor Mroon stepped forward. Admiral, I believe we may need to reconsider some aspects of our tactical curriculum. Perhaps there are perspectives we've been overlooking. The Admiral nodded slowly. Indeed, perhaps there's more to these humans than we anticipated. He turned to Eliza. Student Blackwood, I believe the Academy Council will want a full debriefing on your methods. As the Admiral left to oversee the cleanup operations, the other students gathered around Eliza. The mood had shifted dramatically from the beginning of the class. How did you know they would target the auxiliary data center instead of the more valuable research labs? Zorvan asked, his bioluminescent skin pulsing with curiosity rather than disdain. Because they weren't after value, Eliza explained. They were after access. The auxiliary center has lower security but connects to more systems. That's brilliant, Mila admitted reluctantly. Tavik slithered closer. Would you be willing to explain more about this Deathworld thinking? Professor Mroon cleared his throat slits. I believe we all have much to learn from student Blackwood. Perhaps at tomorrow's session, she might lead a discussion on alternative tactical doctrines. As the group filed out of the amphitheater, Professor Mroon held Eliza back for a moment. I must ask, he said quietly, all 6 eyes fixed on her. How did you develop such extraordinary tactical insights without formal training? Eliza gave him a small, sarcastic smile. Nothing extraordinary about it, Professor. On Earth, we call it common sense. When you grow up on a planet that's constantly trying to kill you, you get pretty good at spotting when something's trying to eat you. She shrugged with deliberate casualness. Besides, I was just following the obvious strategy. Isn't that what you teach here? The professor's mouth slits twitched in what might have been the beginning of genuine respect. Perhaps, he admitted, we should redefine what we consider obvious.